growing with purpose, people at the core. That's what our session is all about. We are going to be talking about multiple things during this session, but the focus for this session is people, that is all of us, and how organizations scale, how organizations grow, but keep their people in mind at all points of time. And we are going to explore different parts of the growth of organizations, how talent is seen in the sector, professional talent as well as management talent. We're going to talk about that. The session is divided into two parts. We've got a fireside chat, followed by question and answers with the audience. The aim is to have the audience involved at all points of time. The second part is going to be a panel discussion, and again followed by a question and answer session. We've conceptualized and designed this session along with Pradhan. They've been our partners for Dialogues on Development Management. Some of them are here, our partners, and thank you so much for all the effort that they've put in for this session. So the objective largely is for us to collectively learn and share knowledge and experiences. Knowledge that the panelists are going to share, as well as a lot of information that we would like to get from you from the questions that all of you would be asking. In the fireside chat, largely we will explore the role of professional and management talent in the organization's success and growth, and how these requirements have evolved over the years. In the panel discussion, our aim is to get some insights into how an organization manages various aspects of growth and expansion while maintaining people-centrism as they transition from small to large scale. We'll start, I'll introduce our panelists. We've got Dr. Rajesh Tandon, who's the founder, president of PRIA, Participatory Research in Asia, and he co-chairs UNESCO's Community-Based Research and Social Responsibility in Higher Education. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Tandon. And we've got Wilma Rodrigues. She's the founder and CEO of Saha Zero Waste, a social enterprise committed to implementing holistic zero waste solutions across India. Thank you so much, Wilma, for joining us. I'll start with Dr. Tandon. Dr. Tandon, we've been talking about professional and management talent. Let's start with defining what is professional talent in the sector, in the social sector. How do you look at professional talent or define professional talent?
Thank you very much, Deeksha, and thank you, ISDM, for convening this wonderful day of dialogue. I came to this sector from what is currently called professional and management talent. IIT Kanpur, IIM Calcutta, PhD in management, doing grassroots work in late 70s, early 80s. So rest of the sector, whatever that was, looked at me with deep suspicion that I am going to somehow turn them into corporates. The suspicion arose arising out of a difference in understanding of what is professional. And unfortunately, to some extent, that difference continues. We tend to generally equate formal qualification with professional. It goes back to the ILO classification. So during COVID time, all of us realized, sort of middle class fellows like me, that my illiterate maid was actually quite competent and professional. But she is classified as unskilled and therefore only gets 2,000, 20,000 rupees a month. She is not unprofessional. She just lacks professional certification. So a lot of people in the early days were concerned that degrees and experience are being put together. So you say compare degree and compare experience. A lot of people in those days were practicing on the ground. Many of them had high school degrees, some not even that. But those with qualifications were being treated as professionals. So I think the there is a difference that we need to understand between formal qualification and being a professional. And one of the criteria I tell my colleagues or wherever I go is that if you are punctual, that's professional competence. If you deliver your commitment, that's being professional. If you are straightforward and authentic, that's being professional. Degrees do not necessarily create those competencies. Not necessarily. So I'll leave at that as my definition of professional.
Wilma, you've been in the sector for a long time. Do you see, one is professional talent, and like Dr. Tandon defined it, not necessarily just with the qualification, but your approach also on how you work. But do you see a demand for professional, and I'll move it to management also, management talent and expertise within the sector? You moved from the corporate sector. You're a crossover, long time back. But do you see that in the sector at this point of time?
Yeah, thanks. Good to be here. And so, we work with waste. And waste management has typically been a sector which has been, whether not-for-profit, charity, etc., has been the core delivery mechanism for waste management. Of course, government has been there and also is expected to deliver waste management services. But over a period of time, in the last 20 years, we've seen at least Sahas, which started 21 years ago as a not-for-profit, transitioned and also set up a second entity, which is Sahas Zero Waste, which is now a social enterprise, a for-profit, which has got its focus on environmental and social impact. When it comes to professionalism, in this sector, ownership of anything that we do is very important. And that's what I like. I kind of connected with the founder of Mindtree, Subrata Bakshi, when he said that a professional is somebody who can do work not supervised. And that is something that is very, very key to what we also believe at Sahas Zero Waste. We do need professional talent for sure. But there is that combination of skill and will that we constantly have to look for. Let me take a simple example. We are now a for-profit. We are now looking at acquiring customers who will align with what we deliver as a service, which is, circular economy, which is resource recovery, and therefore we really need a good sales and business development team, and this is the kind of talent that we look for. But our sales cycle is like really long. It could be anything between 6 months to 5 years. Because people are just not willing to understand what it takes to deliver waste management services. So here you are, you'll have, person highly qualified, has all the fundamentals about CRM, an entire, it could be a person very highly qualified, but then he comes into this space where the ecosystem for accepting waste management is really not there. So therefore, he does need all those aspects that will keep him grounded in what he has to deliver. So that's the kind of balance that we look for in terms of skill and will. The will is equally important. The will comes from being resilient in owning the fact that you want to reach out to customers. And of course, there is also a delivery mechanism which is required. There are targets like everybody else. And there is, expectations for closing on customers. So therefore, the skill. And I think this is what we are now looking for in this sector. The skill and the will coming together to, do what it takes on the ground to make the change.
No, absolutely, Wilma. Wilma, just to follow up on that, for like you mentioned, for profit, the organization which is for profit, but whereas the one that you have non for profit, there also are you looking at the combination? You took a very good example of the sales and how you need that skill set there. But we see a lot of people coming with MSW in the sector. We see, which is a professional qualification. We see people coming, with policy experts coming in. Also, management experts coming in within the sector. Our program at ISDM is a management program, a development management program. And we see our students going and working in different organizations. How do you see it in the non-profit side of it? You run two organizations. So if you compare the two, how would you look at it?
So very much, even in the not-for-profit, we need the same kind of attention to a system, attention to following a system, attention to processes being followed. So we just cannot, be there in a not-for-profit believing that I'm here to, bring change, and my presence alone will bring that change. So those skills which are required, whether it is in the sales or whether it is in operations, because remember that if you're driving a community program, you're very much managing a whole team on the ground and across different kind of spectrum of people, and you need a process for that. And we learn a lot from the corporate sector in how to drive a process. So that kind of requirement is very much there, and therefore this combination of people coming with their skills and understanding what a community program or what a social program delivery on that is very much required. Definitely today we look at data and the fact that we need to give reports and data on a day-to-day basis so that we can actually measure our results, and that is something that we again learn from the corporate sector. But on the other hand, there is the need for people to ground and understand. It cannot just be technology solving all our problems. It has to be people and technology working together.
No, absolutely, very well said. We think technology is going to take away the jobs. I think it just makes our life easier. We cannot remove the human element from it. To run technology, you still need people to do it. It might ease the way we work. It might bring in structure, but still we would require the people. Dr. Tandon, I'll come back to you. Like you said, you come from a management background as well as an engineering background. And, you've been in the sector for 40 years. How have you seen your management education as well as your professional education contribute to the creation, growth, and expansion of your organization in these years?
Well, that's a question that my parents asked. That's a question my first employer, IIM Calcutta, asked. That's a question my PhD advisor asked. 40 years later, I can attempt an answer.
Oh, that's great.
I couldn't convince them at that time. Okay. What engineering and management education taught me was a way of planning, designing, organizing, and implementing. Any program which Priya was starting, and first set of program we did was women's literacy in Rajasthan. I was training literacy instructors. The expertise needed to be blended with the context. What we learn in School of Management is universal knowledge, universal frameworks, universal models. They need to be grounded in each context. What works in Western Maharashtra doesn't work even in Eastern Maharashtra. So when you have the skill set, you need that to be adapted. I came across situations where people in those days in the social sector or voluntary sector used to say, I am competent to do because I have the commitment. So the duality between commitment and competence needed to be redefined. Yes, you need commitment, but what kind of competence required tomorrow for the work you are doing today? And even though it was not a plan, I was running in 1984 a training program on accounting and financial management. Because people said, income tax laws don't apply to us. I said, come on, please. This is the law of the land, and you are doing legal work. You're not doing underground work. So why not? So I think The critical issue is we have had people with law background, we have had an IS serving IS officer come and work 6 years full time, drawing his salary 3 times my salary at that time. We have had people with occupational health background, people with engineering background. The important issue is how do you blend your skill with the will? And that doesn't get done without somewhat, नीचे लेटने के बिना नहीं होता, ऊपर से नहीं दिखता. Whatever नीचे लेटना means. And that's why the model that Pradhan began with, I'm greatly appreciative of that model, is they took professionally trained young people and put them in the villages where there were no toilets. I'm afraid that is not happening so much today. I don't know whether Pradhan is still able to find places where there are no toilets. But you understand what I'm trying to say. The people on the ground who don't have a professional education need your skill set. And as professional education, you need grounded reality and experience. In fact, the participatory research approach we developed was, you cannot promote participation without appreciating and understanding the lived reality. Start from there. Change happens from where people are. Then you add value. So granular micro experiential data is the building block for macro data analytics to come in. If you do macro data analytics without that, it will be a universal model, not roots anywhere.
Thank you, Dr. Tandon. Blend skill with will. Absolutely. Wilma, I'll come back to you. Bringing back of running 2 organizations, a non-for-profit and for-profit. Looking at talent, do you look at talent differently? And in the earlier session, we were talking about compensation. Do you look at compensation also differently for the 2 organizations? I know it's a difficult thing to talk about, but it will be good to understand your perspective on how you look at these things. The type of talent you look at for both the organizations, compensation on those. You did mention that a lot of your people are crossovers from the corporate sector. How do you work with that?
So we are actually, learning a lot from the not-for-profit on compensation, because the not-for-profit today is the CEO is Archana, and she moved in. She's now 8 years at Sahas, the NGO. She is an IIT Kanpur, 20 years of experience with CDOT, and then decided to be a part of waste management, and came in, quickly learned, and earned her way up into becoming the CEO of Sahas. There's always that, there are restrictions in terms, and we saw that in the previous section, where, driven by various different constraints, the compensation at NGOs is a little bit difficult. Now, that's where the NGO and the for-profit Sahas Zero Waste really talk to each other very consistently. And they brought in that median salary. The NGO brought in a median salary where it is a ratio of 1:10 currently in the NGO. 1:10 is in the NGO, and we at the private limited also matched it, saying this is what we will learn from you, and therefore both organizations have that as a common policy. And we see that even the NGO talent that is there, both at the leadership level, many of them having come from the corporate sector, many of them working from the grassroots, really appreciate that. So they know that there is a transparency, that what the leaders say and what they do is something that is evident to everybody, and that is something that both organizations have learned from each other. When you look at the kind of people that you have, actually there is not very much difference, because even in the not-for-profit, we have people who have moved from the Saahas Zero Waste, which is the for-profit, saying that they would like to be more at grassroots, would like to work more with communities, would like to get the feel of working on the ground a little bit more. So that's where you see people who, move into that and are actually working on the ground. And on the other hand, you do have people from the not-for-profit who believe that, they would also like to be customer-facing, move more on targets, and that's something that we do in the for-profit, and there's been a shift that has taken place on that side as well.
No, that's very interesting, Wilma. And, you're talking about 1:10. I was reading an article where in the corporates, 1:200 is what it is, which is a huge gap that we look at. It's important how we, design salaries or what we do, but to attract talent, and that was the conversation earlier, what are different ways to attract talent? And people leaving organizations a lot because of compensation. But there was a study I was going through, and it said, it was for the corporate sector, which said that a lot of people join organizations based on salary. But the reasons for leaving, and this is the corporate one, is because of growth, because of managers or opportunities. Now, that is so contradictory that you join an organization based on your salary, whereas when you leave organizations, they're very different reasons. Dr. Tandon, I'll come back to you again. Over these years, have you seen the requirement for talent change in terms of, when you started? What were the type of people requirements that were there, and what is it today in these 40 years? Have you seen it evolve? What is the change that you've seen?
No, a great deal of change. Context has changed. The regulatory environment has changed. The successes of previous years require new ways of organizing and working. In the early years, the most common professional talent qualification that came in was MSW. It's still there, but those were the only ones who sort of bumped into us. Because we were in Delhi, because our work involved a lot of research and training, we used to attract a lot of deviants from JNU. Any here? I can see some of them, yes. Don't say outside, JNU. DU, not JNU. So and I had to actually explain their parents also what they were doing. I have done that several times. So the difficulty was that in the intermediate period, I would say between late 80s to early 2000, the input of talent was not commensurate with opportunities of growth. And I take Priya also as an example. We expanded when we were training panchayat leaders and working with panchayat. We had 42 offices in the country, suddenly. With only a Delhi office, now 42 offices. We found people to work in Dumka and in Jhajjar and in, all these places, but they inevitably lacked the kind of skill set that was needed when you are away from the head office. Because you are engaging with a range of stakeholders. District collector, panchayat leaders, politics comes in, business institutions, and the community work on the ground. And finding people there was a challenge, and it has always been a challenge to send people from here to there in this country. I don't know how it is nowadays, but people who have grown up in Delhi or Bangalore, and to send them to, Dumka or Timbuktu may well be a challenge. So at that time, there was a shortage of supply, I would say. Not that people were not getting trained, but they were not coming into the sector. And I would say it is our collective weakness of that period, that we didn't reach out to the universities and colleges. Which is, by the way, you read out my UNESCO chair. For the last 10 years now, I'm jabbering at UGC and AICTE to make credit-based community engagement a reality. And it has happened now under NEP, and that's why I'm putting my energies. Take young people to understand the community, take 100, maybe 10 will come and move towards this sector. So the demand for the competencies in today's context is become more complicated. You need more, a wider variety of skill set, including technology, and also, in a way, blending the local with the macro. That skill set is what we need. And a lot of people are now coming in. So, for example, people coming in, Priya supplies a large number of people who go to do masters in policy studies. They all get attracted towards policy studies after 2-3 years work. But in Indian context, policy studies need to be linked to policy implementation. There is no topic on earth on which we don't have a policy or a law, and none of them function. So why the power equation in policy making and policy implementing can only be appreciated when you have done some work on the ground. Just entering from academics into policy analysis doesn't give you that nuanced, badbudar experience, let me put it this way. So I think demand for talent has increased, a wide range of people are needed, but adapting to the specificity of the organizations is a challenge still. And specificity, I mean context and location as well. So we can, I don't know how many of the new people with IT background will come and work with me in Muzaffarpur in Bihar. Sitting in Bengaluru, Muzaffarpur looks very different. So that's where the disconnect is. Demand is there, but the supply disconnect I see is in only this part. And I want to congratulate ISDM because you are trying to bring in a new set of professionals, sensitizing them to this part of the reality, which is not being done in institutes of technology or institutes of management.
Thank you, Dr. Tandon. I think some very interesting points that you've brought up about the wider variety of skill sets that are needed in today's day and age, the experience, the ground level experience that people require with a combination of the right education, where then they get the experience. We come across a lot of people who've worked, at a younger age or at the entry level. They're all right working in remote locations, but as they grow, they would like to start working, come back to the cities. And again, everybody has their reasons of doing it. Either people are getting married, they are, at different stages of life. So I think that will always be the case. And as organizations grow, we'll have to figure out how we can retain, attract, and develop this talent and keep them excited at these remote places also. That's a lot of thought that the sector needs to put into it, because there's a lot of work that needs to happen in remote areas, and we do lose talent there. Now I'd like to open up for Q&A for the audience. Please ask your questions. Yeah, can I have the mic there, please?
That's, thank you so much. That's just a question top of my mind. Like, we have been continuously talking about that, okay, people are not, maybe still not ready to come and work in, let's say, Timbuktu or Muzaffarnagar. So my question is, what do you think are the reasons that they are not ready to come and work at that level? And of course, we insisted that there is a dire need to work on ground. But what do you think are the reasons that they are not coming and working? Because I just have a follow-up question on the same. I mean, one of the reasons I feel I have identified is compensation, which ma'am has already spoken about. So are we, as your organization, have we put in thought that what kind of compensation should be given to the people who should work on the ground, and comparison to all the IITians and whom we have been talking about that, okay, this person is from IIT and, doing consulting. So what is the compensation bar we are setting so that we can attract the talent over there and keeping people at core? Thank you.
This is a combination from our earlier session, I think,
Yeah,
on
yeah.
compensation.
I'm sorry I wasn't there. My loss. The factors are both push and pull. The one of the points that you made, that a lot of young people would put in 2, 3, 4 years, and then some organizations, including my own, used to give what is called in government difficult location compensation. It was hardship allowance, whatever that hardship was. Many organizations still do and have field living arrangements, safe, clean, but obviously commensurate with the context. And that helps in, taking care of some of your creature comforts. And that should be seen as a part of it. I think the greatest damage that is being done, in my view, to reduced attraction of talented, competent, motivated young people to such locations is what I call marketing by package. There is no educational institution I have come across in this country, barring a few public sector universities, which don't advertise a package. The best students get this package, and package is defined in monetary terms only. So, it is common, therefore, natural for young people to say, if the package is 50 lakhs and you are offering me 7% of that, then I am a deviant, I am the outlier. And that is a very unfortunate situation, because if you are 18-year-old, 19-year-old, that's what gets into your... And parents are asking. I am still counseling parents of young professionals who have joined our work outside Delhi, saying that you will be shocked what these people will do 5 years from now. Don't push them कि तुम्हारे भाई को तो इतना मिल रहा है, तुमको इतना मिल रहा है, तुम्हारे नेबर, तुम्हारे बैचमेट कोई तुमको उनको 10% भी नहीं मिल रहा है, वगैरह वगैरह. And it is that which is distracting. I don't think young people do not want to work. I think they want to work. I have not come across anybody who says I don't want to work in difficult situations. And I like that very much. But it is this, so unfortunately or fortunately in our time, if you explain to your parents and neighbors and you ran away from the small town, they didn't bother you after 6 months. So they left me alone after a while. They won't positively praise me as that he made a good life, a good career, but they will also not harass me. But these days I find young people being harassed by their families and their peers constantly. I think in ISDM and some educational institutions in the country, we need to talk about this. We need to, but that 4 or 5 years of experience in a difficult area sharpens your skill set, gives you an understanding which actually you can lean on your competence to deliver.
Absolutely, Dr. Tandon. We come across a lot of students coming in for our program wanting to work at the grassroots level. They come from smaller places and they would like to work there and contribute. But what you're saying is absolutely valid. What's the motivation? It's the commitment, it's the inspiration that they have to work there. We'll take one more question before we move to the next session.
Yeah, hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Just taking up from there, I can see that the problem we are facing is that we are looking for talent in our own backyard, Delhi, big cities. Can we make a change by shifting our recruitment to the local areas? Isn't talent over there? Aren't they brainy people? They are the people who are coming to cities and doing things over here. Why can't we shift our focus? We move out of our comfort zone, go there, train them perhaps a little bit, and recruit from there so that they are working in their own backyard.
People from the community, absolutely. Wilma, you'd like to take that?
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that, and that is something that we need to do also, make sure that there is the exposure that they get to kind of have also the relevant skills. So I think there has been a lot of work done. A lot of smaller organizations are doing that to develop skills in the rural area so that they can definitely take charge and be part of the solutions that are coming up. So completely agree with you on that.
Absolutely. If we can train people there, they would have the context, and something that Dr. Tandon earlier was mentioning about, people going from cities and working there. They need to understand a lot of the context to the area, dealing with the panchayat, dealing with the local folks. If we can train them, absolutely. But that's where the challenge also comes up. All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Tandon. Wilma? We will start with our next panel discussion. Thank you so much. Just give us a second to set everything up. Thank you so much, Mathew, for joining us, Ajay and Aakash for joining us. Just a brief background on everybody. Aakash Sethi, he's the founder and CEO of Quest Alliance. We got Ajay, he's part of the leadership team of Pradhan, and he's looking after the HR function. And then we have Mathew Cherian. He was with HelpAge. Currently, he is the chair of Care India. Thank you so much for joining us. We would pick up the second part of the discussion right now. And Mathew, I'd like to start with you. You've been in the sector for a very long time. And as organizations scale, how do you ensure that the core purpose, vision, as well as the culture remains intact as they scale? Or do you see changes in that also? If you could talk a little about it from a people perspective and the scaling perspective, please.
Actually, thank you, ISDM. My elder daughter is an ISDM alumni, so I feel I'm with friends and family. I would like to begin somewhere in 2003, where Dr. Rajesh Tandon and Priya did a survey of the non-profit sector and estimated that there were 1.2 million non-profit organizations. This is in 2003. And subsequently, early this year, we and a team, ISDM also was a partner, we launched a Million Missions report, which said this figure has gone up higher. But it also said one important thing, that all the non-profits contribute 365 billion rupees to the economy, approximately 2% of the GDP. And it also said this sector is creating innovations and last mile connectivity and contributing to policy domain. How have they been contributing to the policy domain? They've been contributing as part of scaling up by creating laws like the right to information, creating laws like the right to food, and then the ASHA worker, which excelled during the COVID, was a creation of the non-profit sector. And this was adopted into the government policy, and now we have millions of ASHA workers. The fact that they're not being paid like management graduates is an issue which we'll have to deal with later. But what is happening in scaling up, what needs to scale up is the value proposition of the sector. That is why in our time, and I'm of course dated like Dr. Tandon, 40 years in the sector, we used to call this sector as a voluntary sector. Why do we call it voluntary sector? Because our contribution is voluntary. We may be paid as salary, but the salary may not be compensating an IIT graduate or a management graduate. I think even in Pradhan, that used to be the philosophy. So rest of it is your voluntary contribution. So if you have to scale up the voluntary sector, you will have to scale up with a growth of ethical values. I would say growing with purpose, ethical leadership and governance is at the core of this whole thing. If you can build an organization with ethical leadership and values, then you will have a greater sense of growth, and that will help you to scale.
Mathew, I think what you pointed out about value for the sector, not just the organization, is such a important point here, where and the ethics part of it, which helps you grow, which helps you scale in a variety of ways, and maintaining that as the core of the organization is extremely important. Moving on from this, Aakash, I'll come to you. As we scale, and you've been in the sector, you started the organization, you were 4 people, you've grown to 400. How do you look at the leadership change? How do you look at leadership evolve as you grow, or the leadership's model evolve? If you could talk a little about that.
Sure. I think the first is really the mental model on leadership, right? I mean, typically we've been celebrating individual leaders, this idea that individuals need to lead versus the idea of a collective, and the notion that, we've grown up with, say, a family as our first sort of organization, where we see sort of patriarchy, and we are not able to really ground ourselves in the idea of a collective, which is not necessarily about the one, but there are many people who can actually lead, and sort of therefore it is a ship, or sometimes it's a pirate boat which needs to become a navy ship, and therefore sort of again this idea that is our mental model really framed around collective and shared leadership versus individual-led leaders. And sometimes leadership can be fairly isolating, or it could be fairly it's a difficult experience. It's not as glamorous it's made out to be oftentimes, right? So how do we as leaders accept that it's not about the one, it's about many, and therefore as we think about scaling organizations and scaling leadership, it has to be by design and not by chance. So you have to be really obsessed of doing inner work as leaders, as much as we are obsessed with making a difference out there. So it definitely starts with the individual, but also the team really thinking about what's the strength that we are building as a whole collective. So I think that's one thing. How do we design? And therefore it's not just design at the top, where you talk about 1 or 2 leaders, and then you talk about 10, 15 other leaders, but it's about cascading a leadership architecture across the board. So that's something which we need to do as we think about scaling. I think the other is really alignment of leaders with the organizational purpose, and are we creating space and freedom for leaders to also drive a certain thought process within an overall organizational mandate. Examples being, if people are from specific geographies, are we creating spaces in those geographies for people to go and lead there? Identifying those people who can perhaps have new ideas and give them the freedom to experiment with new ideas. So I think freedom to really align, and this alignment is a constant process. You can't necessarily, say that you have arrived and you have aligned. So accepting that, again, it's work in progress and it's never complete, and being comfortable with that. Oftentimes we sort of tend to chase the perfect model, and being comfortable with that discomfort of a imperfect model is another thing I feel we need to embrace more of. And finally, I think it's oftentimes we feel that leadership development is about training programs and creating more and more training programs that will build more leaders. I think it's also equally about creating space for leaders to be involved in organizational decision making, and to be able to create that space where a leader who feels strongly about certain things that are not going well in the organization can actually drive change by taking action, and not necessarily say that this change has to be led by someone sitting up there. So from a Quest perspective, at least, these are some things we've thought about, that how do leaders, can redefine values? How can they redefine how we do our audits on green energy or green, like utilizing resources effectively, or any other, thing that really matters to them. So the organization creates space for leaders for individuals who are not necessarily up in the hierarchy, but who are able to drive change, and that driving change becomes the practice of leadership. And I think that practice of leadership is what is more critical than just sort of conceptual ideas of sort of having leaders through training programs. So yeah, I think those are a few thoughts on that question.
That's very interesting. And, I always feel that leaders are not just people who are leading at the top or with more experience, but I think we see these leadership qualities in people who are starting also, how you bring up things, how you talk about, issues that are there, or you take initiative, and that's how we build the leadership capabilities in people. But, I would like to even understand, as people grow within organizations and as organizations scale, and you would have seen it in your organization, does the style change? Is there more decentralization? As a smaller organization, a few people would be doing everything. But as you grow, do you see that? Is there more empowerment? Because one of the challenges that we see with a lot of smaller organizations, and we are going to do a session on succession planning after lunch, where, building the next line of leadership is also there. But how do you empower your people to learn and grow? So have you seen that? And has that happened at Quest?
Yeah, I think again it's a question of the core that, say for example, our performance management system is not about just setting goals. It is about knowing what are the different career paths, growth paths that you have access to, making that very transparent, saying these are the possible growth opportunities, and then plan and set goals as well. And therefore, you are not just planning for the next year. You can also create a clarity about what are the future growth opportunities. So I think, one, making the growth paths transparent, and of course they will evolve as the organization evolves, knowing what skills you need to be able to get to those roles. So, and it's not just about growing linearly, it could be growing in other roles, in other teams as well. So one is just being able to put all that out there and let people then take the responsibility to also drive their growth. So it's not just about saying the manager or the organization is responsible, but individuals also need to start meaningfully
own their growth,
planning their growth and owning the growth. So whose responsibility is it? Is it the responsibility only of the organization or of the individual who can navigate the different possibilities? So again, yeah, having that partnership which really allows for individuals to drive growth and change as well, to that extent, the other part.
That's very interesting. Mathew, I'd like to come back from the leadership perspective of, how, how does the values and culture play a role in this aspect of leadership, growing the leadership within the organization, as they scale?
Actually, some of the values of ethical leadership, the first and primary value is accountability and transparency. The leader has to be transparent. There are many organizations, actually today's generation is very clear. They exchange notes and say, don't go to this organization, atmosphere is toxic. So you might have heard this if you have children. But anyway, so they actually exchange notes. So what they mean is the leadership is not transparent. Everything is happening behind closed doors. There is no open door policy. There is no discussion. So this is one main concern. The second concern is the respect for your partners, participants, and your staff. I think in many organizations, even if you talk to different levels of staff, I make it a habit, I talk to the chaprasi when I go to the government, sorry to use that word, but peons there, and ask, how's your boss? Arey saab bahut kadak hai, wo uske paas mat jana. So they reflect. Actually, the way the lowermost person in your organization is treated reflects the whole culture of your organization. If you tell the person who cleans your toilet that you are the most important person in our office, if you keep the toilet clean, the whole organization will be clean and it will be a thing. But if you call him your class 4 employee, either when you go into the toilet, you should remain standing, you should not sit down, then immediately he will clean half-heartedly and you will get poor output. So the way you treat your staff and whether you show respect, that is an important thing in an organization for leadership. The third area is actually people can judge how competent you are. Of course, Dr. Tandon talked about participatory leadership. There's also like participatory leadership where you ask others the view. The boss doesn't mean the boss knows everything. I have dealt with so many situations where I was completely at sea, but some of my staff had the answers to the solution. If you can clean your ears and listen to them, then half your job is done. And that is leadership. So if you can cultivate these values of accountability, transparency, respect, and also listening, participatory leadership. Actually, participatory leadership is that you may be the first among equals, but the others also have to contribute to the organization. Then only you can grow. Otherwise, you will not be able to grow.
No, absolutely. Matthew, I think it's a very important point that a lot of times leaders feel that they know it all. But the ideas that you get from people around you and collectively building that and co-creating something is immense, because a lot of times we don't realize that people at the ground level, they're able to see a lot more than what we can even think about. And getting the thoughts and ideas from them can make a huge difference. All right, I'll move ahead. Ajay, I come to you now. You've been with Pradhan for a very long time. You've done multiple roles. But tell me, in the last 10 years that you've been managing the HR function, how have the processes and systems evolved from a people perspective as Pradhan has grown, in these 30 years, from about 10 people to about 850 people that are there? How have they grown, and have you seen the processes evolve from what they were maybe 15, 20 years back and where you are today? And how do you look at people at this point of time?
Yeah. Few years back, anyway, today morning only I came from Kesla, a campus in MP, Hosengabad, where our 40 young people who have joined. Now, and as you have said, they have their own struggles. So now, when as an organization, we look at them, how do we look at them? They are employees, or they are development leaders, or they will grow in Pradhan. So that's actually changes one's orientations, how do one see another person in the organization. The people who have taught us have said that when you are grooming a young apprentice, you might be grooming a future development leaders or executive director of Pradhan. So that's how one might be. So as far as, despite of we grow, some of the spirits that these young people from different institutes, they have go through an inner journey to make a choice which involves talking with their parents, dealing with the friends, and etc. etc. So there's a valuable in that sense. Few years back, we made an attempt to articulate what are few non-negotiables. So one non-negotiables we came out with the centrality of individual, as you are saying that people-centered, so centrality of individual. It means an individual is trustee, an architect of the development. So when a person interacting with the community or any stakeholders, that person is alive, and that is the one is giving oneself in that interactions. So that is how people, so what kind of the processes that one can have so that despite of growing in scale, one can nurture that spirit. That we came with a principle, which is principle of subsidiarity. At the problem needs to be solved at the nearest point. If a recruiter is going to recruit a young person, and we have around 60, 70 recruiters go to different campuses, and they are not so-called HRD people, they are our field colleagues. They go to the campuses and they make decisions there. If a new person is joining, who would be most influential person in the person's life? Is the field guide, who is trained in some personal counseling stuff. Because at that point of time, this young person does not have anybody. Unka parents be, they would be discouraging, friends would be discouraging. So who would listen? So this is the another aspect is when we are talking, again, all these are connected about the leadership. And what is leadership? Leadership is about influence. So when one would be looking at young person, if I am seeing the person as a leader, I would value that the person will not only will depend on me, but often become counter-dependent, not agreeing to me. And that is the growth probably. So can I value that when somebody, some young person is disagreeing, Achinta is sitting here, we have been disagreeing him, and he valued us, and probably we continued with that.
No, Aakash, Ajay, this is really interesting to hear how at Pradhan you've been looking at these aspects. I'd like to move on and talk a little about hierarchical structures as organizations growing. And Aakash, I'll come to you again. How do you look at as you grew, in your experience with other organizations, as organizations are growing, do they need to maintain a hierarchy to run the organization, or a flat structure would also do, and why?
So I think, obviously we've had again the model about, structure and sort of organizational charts which sort of give you sort of a sense of power and decision making and who, is more important, and that's sort of the way we've been programmed to think, and I think the model again around that does hierarchy or flat be an either or can you have both, and how do we decipher how do you really have both, because you need hierarchy for certain things and you need a flat system for certain things. So at Quest, at least, we like to talk about it not as a structure but as an architecture, so that you don't necessarily only think about a way to decision making is there, who can make what decisions at what sort of role level, but at the same time the architecture where different people, despite of roles or hierarchies, can come together to decisions on issues that may be important to the organization. So for example, inclusion is a very could be a very controversial topic within organizations, and you may need to create a space, or you should meaningfully create a space where people from across roles, across geographies, across functions can come together to really identify what are the issues, challenges, how do you respond to them, make a plan, and that need not be led by sort of only a hierarchical power-based role, but could be formed by individuals from across the system. So that is an example of an architectural space where you don't get caught in someone from the people team or the HR team leading that as the main thing, and then having also space for dissent. Because if you create architectural spaces, then people are not going to be always accepting of sort of, because the power and the role hierarchy is there, I will accept it. And therefore, do you have space for dissent as leaders to be able to hold back and allow for people to disagree openly and not feel the need to answer that question, but let that play out? So I think somewhere it is, I think this thing about hierarchy or, flat is more to do with how do we really distribute power, how do we really organize our mental model around power and letting, not having to step in always to answer all the questions like Mathew was saying, but let people thrive in chaos as well and in that confusion as well, and not say that, after this session we need an answer and we need the way forward, because thriving in chaos is, I think, an important way to hold complexity, to hold that churn that's happening within. So yeah, I think those are a few thoughts around sort of moving from sort of structure to architecture and holding space for dissent and chaos rather than order and sort of everything happening as per plan.
All right. No, you've brought in some interesting ones, and especially talking about power. That's the biggest evil I see everywhere. But interestingly, you're talking about collective inclusion of everybody in decision making, bringing together people, collective leadership, and that's what all of us are talking about. That's absolutely essential. How we involve people in different aspects within organizations, and as we grow, as we scale, this becomes imperative that we need to get people involved at every step of the way. And as youngsters, I think it's important for people to take up that responsibility also, not only be given that responsibility by people who are there in the organizations, but all of you taking up that responsibility also to be able to share your opinion, to be able to share your ideas and help the organization scale. Before we move to the Q&A session, I would like to pose a question to all three of you. If you look back to the years, what is something that you would change or do differently than what you've done and what you've done in the past? Mathew, we'll start with you.
One of the key things that I would like to change is in 2003 again, some of us in the development sector had formed a credibility alliance for accountability standards in the sector. And of course, there we had prescribed 1:7 as the top to the bottom kind of scale. If I would like to go back, one thing which I would like to do is to bring back these standards and try to enhance accountability and transparency within the development sector, because there is a great need of it. Because today, of course, we may talk of excessive regulation, we may talk about whatever thing, but there has also been a failure of standards. There has been a loss of accountability. There are many people who say, oh, if you are in an NGO, you're having a great time, आप लोग मजा में है, like. So the thing is, you have to change that perception, and that can only be brought about by changing these kind of scales, trying to go in for a flatter structure, trying to go in for a participatory leadership, more values in the sector. If we can display that or show it to the world that this is how the sector, we are doing good work. I would say that many non-profits are doing excellent work, but as a communication of the sector is very poor. Of course, I find Harsh Jaitley, the executive director of Vani here. I've told Harsh many times that we need to communicate better to the general public, and we have stopped that communication. So this is something which I would like to change to see that it happens. Bring in more ethical leadership, bring in more standards into the sector, and I would strongly advocate for a flatter scales, 1:7 or 1:10 or whatever it is. Not 1:200 as somebody was saying. That should not be the thing. If we do that, we can build up a better development sector.
Thanks, Mathew.
As the topic is growth with purpose, so I would reflect on the growth. And what does it mean? It means whoever the people in the organ, they grow. And as they grow, the organization grows. What does it mean? It means that their own potential being realized. So what are some of the factors might be more facilitative for people experimenting more, taking risk, and becoming more independent and interdependent rather than dependent? That's one area I would reflect. The other thing is today, after so many years, we have been attempting to make a organization better place for both men and women. So we could have started this earlier by, if we could make more facilitative for more women to join and work, our organization would have been more integrated, and as human being in the organization we could have been more integrated, and most probably we can nurture integrating both masculinity and femininity in self and in the organization, and we are late for that.
Thanks, Ajay.
I mean, one, of course, I've had a lot of fun doing what I've done, what we've done, so I think would not change any of that. I think investing in having fun and space for play, I think is really core to being able to really enjoy what you do. But at the same time, I think building on this point of masculine, feminine, and being able to think when you are thinking of scale and, getting the grain first, to understand the grain and to be able to really nuance the grain before you scale and sort of put some boundaries to that. I would definitely, if I were to go back, definitely invest more in the grain before one is able to scale and put some boundaries on scaling. And sort of this decentralization piece sometimes goes a little overboard, where people, because of, say, maybe masculine sort of ideas, go out and say that the idea of growth is all about, expansion is more about.
Please go ahead.
Hi, thank you. My name is Siddharth and I work at this organization called Samarthya. My question to all of you is, how do you kind of support the team to kind of not just survive but thrive in setbacks? Because setbacks are kind of very common in kind of in the work that we are doing day in and day out. Yeah, very simple.
Who'd like to take Mathew?
It might be different in different contexts. For example, in our context, our teams work in different isolated places. However, the team itself, how it is being developed, that's quite important. Even within the group, a person might be facing difficulties. So how in an isolated place, whether we are together or not. So that's one aspect needs to be probably nurtured, and it should be nurtured quite consciously, because it has considering it as a group has a problem also. Because when you talk about the group, we talk about the democracy. And who loves democracy? So nurturing that is one. Second is, as in our area, different teams are different places. So in the surrounding, so in a geography we work. So if anything, any difficulties a team faces, one supports, other people come, because all these people are in that sense a part of one family. They have these not other options. They have to be stay there. So considering that as members of the family, that's how it helps in dealing with the situation. It is not only physical, it is psychological, it is many things.
Thanks, Ajay.
I think one thing I'd add
Sure.
to that is leaders as vulnerable and expressing vulnerability as leaders, as opposed to saying that we want to punish mistakes. How can we go and talk about our mistakes more openly? I think that's critical. I think the other is really metaphors from nature, whether that's the ocean, that's the forest, or that's the birds and bees, being able to really observe and see what principles of organizing can we take and apply in the design of culture and in the design of our ways of being, that can really open up new ways of thinking and believing and creating new belief systems, which we are otherwise very conditioned from our education system to think mechanically as opposed to think as evolutionary beings. I think that's something I would definitely want to emphasize and in building that kind of an environment.
Thanks, Aakash. Yeah. Please go ahead.
Yeah, we briefly touched the next line, leadership. I just want to know, I remember I was part of, so I was basically documenting, and there was an evaluator for the entire organization. The evaluation was happening, and she mentioned a term called freedom to fail in the report. So I really would like to know, because also, like I've heard, I've worked with an organization for more than 11 years. So I've been a young person also, and I also have worked with the director and the management. So now I understand both the scenarios. I would just like to know, what do you think about the concept of freedom to fail? Is this a threat that the torch is not really passed because of, I've heard the evil FCRA, so, but can we have more mentors than leaders? So like a young person is taking the role of a leader, but then there's a senior person who is a mentor. Why, I really think, why do people not want to rotate the leadership? Why do we still see the same faces everywhere? So I would really like to know, because I've understood that the young generation is taking risk. We like, there's a strong social network of, challenging the toxic culture. I'm a part of such network. We are talking about organizations, we are talking about people. So the world is listening. The young people are having their ears and eyes like really open right now. And also it's coming with privilege. Everybody can't choose, that they want to work with a particular organization or not. So there's also a sense of choice in many young people who are coming from a privilege. But what do you think about this model of mentorship rather than leadership? And how do you really conceptualize this concept of freedom to fail? Yeah.
So, Matthew, before you start, I'll just, like to use, rather than freedom to fail, freedom to experiment. Because it's not that it's always a failure, but yes, the opportunity also. Matthew, please go ahead.
Yeah. Actually, maybe I should ask Dr. Tandon to talk about it, because there was a whole series where Dr. Tandon's organization, Priya, trained a lot of non-profits across in a kind of mentorship role on participatory leadership, participatory management, succession planning. Rajesh, should you like to talk about it? Please.
Thank you, Matthew. Sort of listening very carefully now, put on the spot. I always believe that learning is critical. My advice to all my colleagues and anywhere else is, don't repeat your mistake. Make a new one. You may call it learning to fail, but I think experimentation, trial and error is the essence of what we do in this sector. If we assumed even for once that we have got the answer and this is the model we're going to promote all over the country, it will become stagnant. So the fear is not just the fear of the so-called leader. The fear is inherent in the way that the design of programs and monitoring and evaluation. Evaluation looks at failures as opposed to successes. People hide real stories when evaluators come by. But if you do that, you never learn. So, the essence of this is space, safe space to learn, because when you try to learn, you also have to unlearn, and when you unlearn, it can be painful. So that is the essence, and the growth of individuals, as we are discussing, is actually growth of learning new ways, learning new ideas, learning new skills. And I think a culture, organizational culture that supports that. I was listening to the panelists. I believe the most important role leadership performs is nurturing a culture internally and warding off threats externally. The rest, all other colleagues do.
Thank you, Dr. Tandon.
I would just like to add that when I started Charities Aid Foundation, Dr. Tandon was my chair. So he was a kind of mentor. So of course, now it's 25 years away. But still, things are growing and the organization is growing. There has been succession planning, new leaders have come in, etc. And I know Pradhan also has every 5 years the executive director changes. So there is inbuilt. So I think leaders have to set up this culture that there should be transition. It is not that, like we say, management participation is I manage, you participate. It should not be like that. It should be a culture where I can be wrong, and after a few years, another leader will come up. So in many places, I have put in people who have now become their own leaders. So that is how it works. So if leaders can understand that and do succession in their own way, then the sector will prosper. Otherwise, the organization will die a death in a few years. So that
I
is
want
what.
to add
Thanks,
two
Mathew.
sentences.
Yes, please.
As you talked about executive, one of our ex-executive director is here, Achintya. And Achintya was my mentor in that sense. So I had packed up all my belongings to leave Pradhan. So he, fortunately, I met with him. So he listened me. That I said that I am not able to do. So he listened and said that, क्या करना चाहते हो? करो ना, क्या हो जाएगा? So that's how, when a young person nurtured, that don't be afraid, do if you want to do something, I am with you. So that probably nurtures that kind of the culture from the beginning. That's how I have experienced.
Thanks, Ajay. I think, you've asked a very important question, and, Aakash did touch upon a bit about the role, the responsibility of the leader. Apart from, it being a difficult job, as you grow, it seems that, as you're a leader, it's easy, but I think it's a very difficult task. The amount of responsibility that a leader has, and I believe mentorship is a huge part of that responsibility. And people, if you look at organizations, a lot of people, their leadership styles evolve from how they see their own leader behaving. So that puts a huge responsibility. Like we talk about children. I'm sure a lot of you have children and they're like sponges. So whatever you do when they are little, you see that they will copy you. I feel that in organizations, the leaders are like those people who, what you do, your teams pick that up. And they pick up that style. And very often than not, especially the things which are not very great about the style. So as leaders, each one of us needs to be very careful on what we do and how we nurture our people and give them that space to experiment. Make mistakes, not repeat the mistakes, but make mistakes and learn from them. And that becomes very critical as organizations scale, because you will have to give responsibility to more people. You cannot hold it. That's one of the challenges a lot of social purpose organizations are facing. And we talk a lot about it, on how they're not able to scale because they're not able to pass on that responsibility to other people. So how you groom the talent, how you mentor the talent. And we'll end it here. We'll pick up a lot of this in our next session, Kal Aaj aur Kal, where we talk about succession planning. And that would be at around 2:30.